I'm Converse County Commissioner Robert Short, Chair of the Wyoming County Commissions Association on the Energy and Environment. I'm joined today by Natrona County Commissioner Forrest Chadwick, who is the Chair of the Wyoming County Commissions Association Agriculture, Water, State, and Public Lands Committee. Thank you all for joining us here in Lander. I would like to start things off, please, with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would all please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. Restrooms or wherever you can find them behind the nearest sagebrush or tree. We are in Wyoming. And if those don't work for you, there's some right down the hall here to the right. That's where the big kids' bathrooms are, I'm told, so we can go in and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Or if you prefer a little bit of privacy, just inside the door through which you entered on the right-hand side are a little smaller facilities. To avoid disruptions, please switch your phones to silent or vibrate mode. There will be public hangings in the event that you do not. In that same spirit, I ask that phones or side conversations please be held outside the meeting room. It's a busy week here in Lander and across the great state, and I know many of you will be coming and going as necessary to attend to other obligations. When doing so, please be quiet and respectful of speakers and your fellow audience members. There is Wi-Fi network available in this room. It's known as the Community Center, and the password is Red Tulips 2019, which I believe is displayed behind me prominently on the screen. At 12:30 p.m. sharp, we will break for lunch, which will be served right here. Forrest is demonstrating, like Vanna White, exactly where that food will be available to you. It's virtually there now, as you can see. And this evening, you are all invited to a social hour at the Gannett Grill Loft upstairs at the Gannett Grill from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., where we will have drinks and appetizers provided by our generous sponsors, the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts, the Petroleum Association of Wyoming, the Nature Conservancy, and the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. At this moment, if there are any members of the press with us today, I would like you to rise and introduce yourselves, please. No public hangings, so thank you very much. With that, I will say a few things about this training and invite Commissioner Chadwick to do the same. With the federal government overseeing nearly half of Wyoming's lands and significant subsurface estate, I believe that it is critical that we, as elected officials, agency personnel, interested parties, and residents of the state have an understanding of the laws and policies that guide the management of these resources. As you will see from the agenda, this training is meant to both inform attendees about these laws and to also foster discussion and dialogue about how management actually happens on the ground. We hope that this training is an opportunity for us to discuss how we can facilitate management of public lands in a way that results in the improved economic and cultural well-being of Wyoming's residents, as well as the protection of important natural resources. I'm looking forward to hearing and participating in this discussion, and now I will turn it over to Vanna, or Commissioner Chadwick.
Gosh, he's tall. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Short. First, I'd like to begin by recognizing our WCCA staff that made this event possible. First of all, Jeremiah Riemann, who couldn't be with us here today. He's our executive director. He is attending the Joint Revenue Committee meeting in Cheyenne to see if the state's going to have any money this year. Secondly, Kelly Little, there in the back, is our deputy director. Thirdly, Brittany Butler, our executive assistant. She was at the reception table. And lastly, and certainly not least, Bailey Schreiber, our natural resource counsel. Many thanks to these folks who have worked diligently to bring us together here today. I also want to recognize the speakers we will hear from today and tomorrow. Thank you for taking the time to share with us your perspectives and expertise. We look forward to hearing from you. With that, I will echo Commissioner Short's remarks and add my own. Wyoming is often recognized as a leader when it comes to addressing difficult and complex natural resource issues together. As I speak, Governor Gordon's advisory group on migration corridors is meeting to develop recommendations on the management of ungulate migration in a way that both allows for mineral development and agricultural practices while still maintaining the functionality of these corridors. And tomorrow, the sage grouse implementation team will meet to discuss revisions to the sage grouse executive order, an order that laid the groundwork for preventing the listing of the greater sage grouse on the Endangered Species Act. These and other initiatives show that we in Wyoming are willing and able to tackle tough natural resource issues, and often we do it collectively. The agenda and speaker lineup for this conference is also evidence of that. We'll hear from a variety of speakers, federal and state agencies, county commissioners, wildlife advocates, conservation groups, and industry representatives on what works and doesn't when working together and how we engage in the federal decision-making process. I, like Commissioner Short, look forward to this discussion. And now I'll turn it over to Bailey to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bailey Schreiber. I'm the Natural Resource Counsel for the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And I'm thrilled that you all are here today for this conference. I was just talking to some folks earlier this morning about putting this together, and I've attended my fair share of conferences, and it was really fun to get creative about the agenda and put together a conference that I would really want to attend. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you all are as well. I wanted to say thank you again to Brittany Kelly and Brooke Hamilton, who is WCCA's extern, for helping put this together. We really appreciate the work that they have done. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Philip Lowe. He is an attorney for the United States Department of the Interior, Office of the Solicitor, where, among other things, he advises BLM on NEPA and FLTMA issues associated with environmental impact statements and environmental assessments for a variety of land planning actions and project-level record of decisions. Phil will be talking with us today about the National Environmental Policy Act and cooperating agencies, with a focus of these topics in the context of the BLM. So please help me welcome Phil.
Thank you very much. Whoop, sorry. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me. And whenever you have a presentation from an attorney, first thing in the morning, we're going to start out with some accurate definition of terms, and we'll go into statutes and law and everything else. And I'll start to talk a little bit softer and quieter. No, we're not going to do that. So Commissioner Short talked about, whoop, there we go, sorry, there's a little lag here. I'll get this. There we go. There is no federal attorney presentation that comes without a disclaimer. So whatever I say, it's my own opinions. It's not the official position of the United States, the Department of Interior, the Office of the Solicitor, or any of our bureaus. What I'm here to talk about is NEPA. And so Commissioner Short said it's not everybody pirouettes accurately. So what does NEPA stand for? And don't tell me it's never-ending policy analysis, because that's part of it. What is it? It's the National Environmental Policy Act, right? NEPA. How many times do you think it shows up in court decisions where somebody refers to it as the National Environmental Protection Act? Has that ever happened? I can tell you, I've had draft briefs from the Department of Justice, experienced lawyers just slipping that in. So it is not about protection so much as policy. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about NEPA to start, and then we're going to talk about the role of cooperating agencies, because that's really an important piece of this. And then I'd like to share some information about what the Department of Interior is doing to try to increase efficiencies in the process. Because, face it, many of you have been involved. How many people here have been involved in some way in a NEPA analysis or a project? Almost everybody in the room. And these things are, again, NEPA is an act. What is NEPA supposed to do? There's a judge who was from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and he wrote once that NEPA is not a green Magna Carta, and federal judges are not the barons at Runnymede. Yet many people will say NEPA is a green Magna Carta. And who could guess who that judge is? He's now on the Supreme Court. Anybody? Come on, help me out here. Nope, Gorsuch was a 10th Circuit judge. This was a DC Circuit judge who went to the Supreme Court. Very close. No, a different DC Circuit judge who's been there for quite a while, Clarence Thomas. So Clarence Thomas wrote that in a case, and it's important to remember because we are talking about an act that provides for disclosure of impacts, analysis of those impacts, and most importantly, public participation in that process. And so how does that work out? Under NEPA, we've got CEQ regulations that talk about how the process works. And essentially, when we're looking at the start of an analysis, we have what's called a notice of intent to prepare an EIS. Do we have to prepare EISs for all federal actions? No. Why not? You can say it out loud. It's okay. So environmental impact statements are required for those federal actions that have a significant effect on the human environment. Not everything has a significant effect. How do we figure that out? We can do an environmental assessment. An environmental assessment, you can do analysis of the impacts and come up with what's known as a FONSI, finding of no significant impact, and that you've met your NEPA obligations in doing that. There's other things that might not require an environmental impact statement. There are categorical exclusions. Those are in either statute or regulations that say these actions are things that we've decided that don't have those types of impacts that require us to do either an EA or an EIS. And so in that case, we can document that we have a categorical exclusion. There's also things known as DNAs, a documentation of NEPA analysis. And what a DNA does is say we have some other NEPA document that's out there that has adequately provided this information so that we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel again. So NEPA is kind of many layers. So we've got the statute, we've got CEQ regulations, and as a part of that, I'm going to be turning from time to time to look at my slides because I don't have a monitor here and my eyes are not good enough to see the one way back there. But one of the important parts of NEPA is cooperating agencies and dealing with cooperators. And how many of you have served or have been involved as a cooperating agency? Okay. I see some of my federal partners haven't raised their hands on that. Can federal agencies also be cooperating agencies? Absolutely, they can. So it's typically, we like to get eligible governmental entities to serve as cooperating agencies. If you want to be a cooperator, you can write. When we have a notice of intent on an environmental impact statement goes out, it goes into the Federal Register. It provides notice to the world that we're going to be doing this, and it starts what's called scoping, which is to look at the issues that need to be analyzed in the document. And at that time, cooperating agencies play a big role because they know what's going on out on the ground. And so typically, you have cooperating agencies that have either jurisdiction over it, like local governments, conservation districts, things like that, or special expertise in the area. And so they can all serve as cooperators. So NEPA provides that you can get involved in the process and get involved early. Now I'm going to jump back one slide, hopefully. FLPMA also provides, so what's FLPMA? It's the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. And that is essentially zoning writ large for public lands under the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Land Management. The Forest Service, which you'll hear about coming up, has an analog in the National Forest Management Act, NIFMA. But FLPMA also provides for cooperating agencies, and Section 202 in the statute itself requires that we have public involvement in these. And so these two statutes working together, NEPA and FLPMA, both anticipate and encourage local governments, state governments to be involved in this process. So how's that work? We've got regulations, and typically we look at, in the federal sphere, we have different agencies are given authority over different actions through statute. That's the first layer of the onion. It's always a statute. Where does BLM get its authority to do things? We typically look to FLPMA for that, the Forest Service for NIFMA. NEPA, the statute, we have the Council on Environmental Quality, and they've put together regulations on this. And they provide for cooperating agencies throughout to do things. But specifically, BLM also has its own planning regulations. So we have a statute, and then we have the agencies with their regulations, and then we have policies below that. But they all point out that there's roles for cooperators throughout this process. And that's really important. Why is it important? Why are we here? This is a tough crowd. Should we have cooperating agencies? I mean, why do we need a cooperating agency? Isn't the federal government all-knowing and omniscient? Can't we figure out everything everywhere? No, it's actually to get the people on the ground who these decisions affect most to be involved in the process, because that involvement helps to focus the analysis for whatever it is that we have this federal decision-making process that at the end of the day, we've complied with the requirements of NEPA to disclose and analyze the impacts associated with that decision. So it's really important to have cooperating agencies. And we've got up at the front desk, I brought up a pile. I hope everyone takes one home. Bailey has holding one up there, the cooperating desk guide, cooperating agency desk guide. Some of you may have received them before from different presentations, but that's really good to, it's a little bit dated, but it's a good overview of how to interact in this process, how to work with the BLM in particular. So in the planning process, and we can go through these kind of steps, BLM, does everybody know what an RMP is? A resource management plan, right. The Forest Service has forest plans. We can talk about land use plans, but the resource management plan is the document that BLM uses through the authority of FLPMA, through the regulations we have at 43 CFR Part 1600, for those of you taking notes. Those regulations spell out how this planning process works. And the first thing BLM has to do is kind of take a look and say, okay, what do we need to do here? And so they do preparation work in the very beginning. Then when a plan comes, when we've decided we're going to move forward with a plan, under the regulations, plans have to have associated NEPA analysis, and there's going to be more detail on how that works later in this workshop. But the planning process starts out, BLM says, okay, we've analyzed the management situation out there. Who can help with that? Cooperators can. When you know BLM is going to be doing something, you can go in and talk to them and say, here are some local issues we see that we believe would be appropriately addressed in this plan. Really early in the process, before we even get to scoping. And then scoping, it's open to the world at large, to the public. And scoping is to find out what issues are important and need to be identified so that we can then analyze those issues. Because at the end of the day, why does this matter, going through these steps? Why does this matter? If someone doesn't like the plan, what are they going to do? They're going to sue. And where do they get the right of action to sue under? Some statutes, like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, have specific authorizations for citizens to sue. Does NEPA have one? No, it does not. So where do people get to sue? The APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, and that provides that when agency decision-making is there, and there's a couple different sections, but the one that's really most used is when we have agency decision-making that is arbitrary or capricious and not in accordance with law, not in accordance with law. So what's arbitrary and capricious? Exactly. It is. And so we have a body of case law under NEPA that tells us what's arbitrary and capricious. Because what kind of analysis do you need in NEPA? What does NEPA require? What kind of look? I heard it somewhere. A hard look. That's right, a hard look. So what's a hard look? It's in the eye of the beholder, right? So you've got to be able to identify, here's the issue, here's what we believe are going to be the presumed environmental effects of moving forward with a particular decision, and here's why. Because if that's not documented, when someone challenges your decision, your federal decision, they're going to say it was arbitrary and capricious. You didn't look hard enough, or you didn't treat this resource the same as another resource. And I would put to you that certain judges today don't just require a hard look. They're taking a much harder look, and sometimes even an impossible look at what an agency should be doing. And so the more that the federal agency can do to involve cooperators and the public and other agencies, so that when someone says you did not comply with NEPA, you didn't take a hard look, you have a document and a record that stands on its own, and you can say, yes, we did, and here's why. And you can show that. So throughout this, it's important for cooperators to also be part of that process, because if we miss something that's real, if the federal agencies miss something that's out there, then it's back to the drawing board. And NEPA is not a never-ending do loop of analysis, although it seems like that sometimes. It should be enough to provide what is reasonably foreseeable. What do we think the impacts of a particular decision are going to be? Because NEPA it's not the National Environmental Protection Act. It does not require a decision that is most protective of the environment, because in many cases you would never be able to do anything if it did. It just requires that the decision be fully informed. And by fully informed, cooperators, again, have a really important role in that. And so when we're going through planning processes, we have different comment periods. The better, and I shouldn't say the better, the more informed and detailed the comments are, the more it can help the agency. And often you may have the impression the agency is just going to do what the agency's going to do. And that's not always the case, because there are times when commenters can provide information that helps to make the decision more defensible in the long run. And cooperators can play a really big role there. You missed something. You need to go back and look at this. And you have that local expertise and knowledge that can help the agency with doing that. And there's a role even after the decisions are made for cooperators and local governments to assist the United States. So this is really something that, here we go. You have a role, and depending upon what you want to do with that role, you can help to improve these decisions. There's also a role outside of the planning process in just typical NEPA processes for other types of decision making that don't involve resource management plans. For example, it may be that there is a very windy area somewhere, and someone wants to use that wind to generate electricity, and it's on federal land, or maybe it's a mix of federal and fee lands in the checkerboard. And so they want to get approval to do this. And what have they got to do? They've got to go to the Bureau of Land Management or to the Forest Service and look for a right-of-way to put their wind structures up. And in going through a process like that, it's not a land use planning process, it's just a decision. Is that going to have a significant adverse effect on the human environment or not? Well, what's the answer to that question? Is something going to be, are you going to need an EIS or an EA? And it's one of the favorite answers I love to give my clients all the time. What's the answer to that? It depends. That's right. It certainly does. It depends on the context and the intensity of the particular decision and those impacts. And why is that important? Because many times there are environmental assessments that the agency does that people will say, no, this is not insignificant. You need to do an EIS. That's a common challenge. So if in the process for making this decision, working through NEPA, you're able to help the agency understand what those impacts are, and if they're not significant, say why you think they're not significant, even at the county level, to provide that helps the agency in the long run to defend its decision. So there are a lot of opportunities here, and we'll get into more of the details as the conference moves forward, but I think you can play a role in helping to shape this, because it is not the federal government just imposing decisions from on high. These decisions are working, many cases, outside of the planning process. They're applicant-driven. For example, with oil and gas development, that process is, it starts with a nomination where someone says, I believe these federal lands might have valuable oil and gas deposits, and I think they should be offered for lease. And the BLM will, how many of you have worked through or have some experience with oil and gas leasing, either in your county or nearby? So less than who have worked on all of NEPA, but still many of you. So this process, so we have a land use plan early on that made a decision that it's appropriate to have certain areas open for oil and gas leasing. And then following on the land use plan, we then have nominations that come in, and the BLM looks and first has to determine, is this something we can lease? How do we do it? And they go through an environmental assessment, and they tier back to the environmental impact statement for the land use plan, which that's where the significant impacts were, and then they look at the specific impacts of offering parcels for lease. That's usually an environmental assessment here in Wyoming. Then we have an application for permit to drill on one of those leases. That's another decision that comes in and needs another layer of NEPA analysis. And whether it's a project where there's only 2 or 3 APDs, or whether it's a full field development of several thousand anticipated wells, that's going to depend, that's going to shape the NEPA analysis for that project. So in all of these different levels of decision making, counties and cooperators have a big role to play. some of the things you want to think about when you're going to serve as a cooperating agency, and you can go through these as well really quickly, but you want to think about scoping. That's the point in the process where you can get your information to the federal agency so it can narrow the scope of the analysis onto those issues that are really important. You also want to look at time limits. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the efficiencies that the department has been improving the time for these, because we've had in the past, and I'll give you more information in just a sec, but some of these drag on forever. So it can place a stress on cooperating agencies when you've got to respond in a timely manner. That can be a challenge. You want to develop relationships. That's one of the reasons that I'm here. My boss has said it is important for us to work with the local and state communities so that we are not seen as some, omnipresent, what was the brooding omnipresence in the sky? That was the Supreme Court for Karen's. Okay, so we're not seen as that. We're here to work together. And so it's important to develop these relationships. And then it's also important for BLM to reach out too, which BLM does, and I think in Wyoming they do a pretty good job of keeping the counties informed as to what is going on. We work on memoranda of understanding. How many of you have had an MOU with the BLM in the past? Many of you, right. Typically, some years ago when I was working on these, every county wanted their own MOU. Here's how what does the MOU do? It doesn't say it up there, but you can find out. But you know what an MOU does. It spells out the relationship moving forward. What are the expectations of what's going to happen during this process that we're working together? Has anybody ever sued on an MOU? Said you broke your promises, you didn't do things right? No, they really don't. But it's more to provide a formal expectation of what's going to be done. And I have a number of sites up there, because it used to be every county wanted its own specific MOU. Here's how we want to run things. It became unwieldy for the BLM in Wyoming. So now we have these templates, and at a national level, we also have the templates. And for the most part, they do a pretty good job of saying, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do, here's how we're going to work together and get through this. So if you want to take a look at some of these, I think there might be an example in the Cooperating Agency Handbook that you've got there, but that can be really helpful. BLM has also done it with the state of Wyoming, said instead of doing an MOU for every little project, we're going to have one big one for everything. So you're in. So the state of Wyoming is going to be participating as a cooperating agency on all of our projects that they want to, and that's in this instruction memorandum that I've got cited up there. Sometimes Department of Interior agencies also work as cooperators, and we've got guidance on that as well. That's something that you can look at. And this IM 2018-65, this is talking about how federal agencies should be working together. How many times have you been involved with a project where you have Fish and Wildlife Service on one hand, Forest Service on another hand, maybe the Bureau of Land Management? How are all these agencies going to interact? Some of these IMs and guidance documents are really helpful in providing an explanation of those relationships. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about NEPA streamlining and what the agency's doing. And I also want to leave some time for questions. I don't see a clock. I think we're doing really good on time, but I'd like to, whenever you have a question, just let me know, please. So NEPA streamlining. Why do we need NEPA streamlining? Gosh, this is a sensitive clicker. Just for future speakers, it's a hair trigger. So this started out with Congress deciding to change NEPA. And we had this Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which is called FAST 41, but it changed certain things in NEPA for large infrastructure projects. This is really important because this was the genesis for moving forward with the streamlining that came from the Deputy Secretary's order 3355. So, and I won't go through all of it, but have any of you ever worked on a Fast 41 project? Kimberly's had one, and I've had a couple where it really moves the process along. There's a lot of efficiencies there. So, Fast 41 set the stage for saying Congress recognized, you know what, for NEPA, it's not in our best interest for a country to have analysis of federal projects taking so long. And I'll show you some examples of how long. This is just what DOI is doing. We have the secretarial order. We had an executive order from the president that also laid this out, said you need to do a better job of moving faster. And so here is the secretarial order. How many of you have heard Secretary Bernhardt talk about this? I know he's been out to talk to some of you on it before. And he has that, yes, yeah. He has a great story, I'll repeat it here. So his order was 4 pages, right? Very simple, straightforward, efficient. How long was BLM's guidance to what BLM needs to do to implement the order? A lot longer. It's about 5 or 6 times longer. So, but that's okay, because we're all working to do the same kind of thing. What does this do? This secretarial order is talking about returning to the intent of NEPA, which was to foster good decision-making, making informed decisions. It's not about generating huge documents. And there are some huge documents that are out there, that's for sure. Here are the goals. I don't have to read them to you, but you've probably said to yourself, how can we make this better? How can we do a better job in making decisions that they just don't get gummed up in this whole never-ending policy analysis? We've got to essentially cut through a lot of that and still meet the requirements of the law, the intent and purpose, which again, it's not about the absolute best decision, it's about an informed decision, a well-informed decision with public participation. So why did we have to do this? The average EIS, just a regular EIS, was taking about 3.5 years. Complicated ones were taking 6 years. The CEQ regs talk about the timing for NEPA documents. How many of you have been involved in projects that lasted so long that the underlying rationale for that project changed? Things change in a long time. Yeah, absolutely, things change. So it doesn't help anybody to have a, Caleb, how long did the Pinedale Anticline EIS take, including the supplement? Yeah, so 10 years just for an oil and gas project. What happens in 10 years? A whole lot. Things change a lot. So that's one of the big reasons, was the time lag in doing these. The length of these documents. How many of you honestly have read an entire EIS? And you know why? I have to now because of my job. So that's something that is changed with the secretarial order as well, is that now authorized officials from BLM have to read every single word in a document. And I'll tell you what, it's no fun to read a 1,300-page EIS. I don't care how interested you are in it. It's going to drive you nuts. So we had complex EISs averaging over 2,000 pages long. That is just not, helpful for a decision maker. Who's going to read a 32,000-page document and say, well, this really helped to inform my decision. Now I know everything there is to know about it, right? So we had, So we had, these extreme examples, you can read them up there. This is one of the reasons why we had to get this process under control. It was really getting out of control. And again, part of this is saying, well, we're going to get sued on this. We have to put more in. Well, we know we're going to get sued on things. Why don't we have better analysis, more focused analysis? Do we have to repeat 5 times in the same document the whole history of the National Historic Preservation Act and how to go through that process and everything else, or what a programmatic agreement is, or, there are certain things we can do better. And this is one of the reasons why. I mean, who wants to look at a 32,000-page document with 97,000 pages if you count the appendices? Nobody. Some of the long time. Look at some of these projects, though. Why did they take so long? Many of them are large planning documents. That's kind of a common theme. And so these are the reasons why we had the secretarial, following speakers, this is really touchy. So now the department has these focused review teams. And one of the things they do is they pull an attorney in early in the process. I can't tell you how many times early in my career I would get a notice of a lawsuit and I'd never even heard of the project before. And now we've got to defend it. And at least now we are required to pull in teams. And so I'm working closely with the BLM, or my colleagues in the solicitor's office are, and we pull in these teams early in the process. We work together through this so that at least on the interior side, we have a much better understanding of where things are going. So there are a lot of different things that attorneys can do. At the same time, because this is such a litigious field, when we're doing public land law decisions, cooperators can also benefit from having attorneys involved too. And I mean, I think that's something that, you don't want to go out and have to pay for an outside attorney, but you have a certain level of expertise that you can help to participate in this process. And so some of the things that attorneys do, we look and we make sure the applications are complete. We look at the purpose and need. We look at range of reasonable alternatives. All of those things we look at with a kind of view towards what are we going to be challenged on, how have we been challenged in the past, and what are we going to do moving forward. And so that's really, I think, helping things. So there's 6 big pieces. This is probably a pretty important slide if you're going to be participating in these processes, because these are big milestones in the NEPA planning process for any type of project. So first, we think we need to do an EIS, even before we've got a notice of intent going into the Federal Register. This is something we need to do an EIS, okay? That's a big one. The notice of intent, that starts all kinds of statutory and regulatory timeframes for moving the process along. That's where cooperators can get involved. Working on the draft EIS. Again, another great place for cooperators to be involved. Once the notice of availability goes out, that's the EIS is out for comments at the draft stage. Then we've got the final EIS and the record of decision. At every one of these stages, cooperators can assist BLM in the process. So one of the important things in the secretarial order, I didn't tell you that it has page and time limits. I know many of my BLM clients appreciate those so much, but there is also a waiver process where, and what are those time limits? 1 year. The BLM is, the Department of Interior NEPA documents anticipate that an EIS will be completed within 1 year of the notice of intent. That is an incredibly compressed time frame when you think about Caleb's previous experience with the Pinedale Anticline at 10 years. There's been other projects that are also out there for a really long time. So that's incredibly compressed. And how long do these documents have to be? 100 pages. That is really hard. And so many times there will be, we just can't do it in less than 100 pages, and so they will go up through an internal process within the department and get a waiver that says you can do it for, you can take a little bit more to explain this because this one's really complex. And there's a lot of factors here that are kind of going through and how things work. These are all the projects that we probably will have waivers on. Many of the projects I work on now are going to take longer than a year. They're going to take longer than 100 pages, but we have had a number of them go through the process and done really well. So I hope to have had better data on this slide. I didn't get the updated data for it to get it through March of this year. But you can see through October of last year, we had 36 briefings on EISs. And so that's when the deputy secretary and a review team from the department at the secretarial level looks at a document and says, is this good to go or not? And of those 36, 30, it was, yep, you're good to go. Move forward. 3 of them required some additional work. 3 of them required a lot of work that was kind of back to the drawing board. So at least this provides some discipline and accountability within the decision-making process for NEPA to have real results, to be able to say, yes, we have improved this. And sorry about that. So is it faster? You can see for yourself up here. We have data that shows that we are getting things done faster, because how many of you have heard once you may have said, well, I know you've got a notice of intent to prepare an EIS BLM, but I haven't seen it in the Federal Register yet. Where is that? And what do your local BLM people tell you? Not anymore, but back in the day. Oh, that's back in Washington. That's back in DC. That's somewhere else. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And you know the whole reason why that we have to have that review, what we call the surname process for these notices? Because the secretary tells this story as well, where once a project came out and there was an assistant secretary read about it in the Washington Post and said, why wasn't I told about this? Well, we didn't know you wanted to know about everything going through the process. So he said, well, I want from now on, I've got to see everything that's going to be going into the Federal Register for this. So they said, okay, we get it to you. And then all the other assistant secretaries said, well, we need to see it too. And then they said, well, if we need to see it, our staff has to look at it. And so you had these long documents which had a surname where everybody would sign off, okay, this document's good to go. And that would work its way, literally a packet, someone walking through the hallway, dropping it on someone's desk, and then they'd get to it maybe sooner, later, whenever. And so this new process, we have a document tracking system that's electronic that you can at any time see where a surname is, and the time limits, the turnarounds are really quick, and I think this slide provides the data to show that, so that there's no longer call up BLM, where is that? It's back in DC. No, you know whose desk it's on now. So we really know that, so that's really helpful. This slide breaks, gosh, that's okay. You sent me like the advanced version. I need the, you can't read this, but trust me, the times that the previous, it does have a laser, but I'm afraid to, oh yeah, you can see this number, the average number of calendar days from a time of submission to publication. So that's when it goes in the Federal Register, 205 days. That was the average under the old process. The recent ones, these are all 2018 dates, 27 days. So if nothing else, it's moving faster to get things from sitting on someone's desk to actually getting in the Federal Register. And again, just some data to show what happened before, what happened after. We're moving much faster now than we were before. So these 7 were done within a year, 22 were done within 2 years, and then 2 took a lot longer. But those are outliers. So I just want to let you know that this process of streamlining is really working out, I think. And I'm gonna click that off just because every time I touch this, it jumps. But I want to ask you some questions. What is your biggest challenge as a county commissioner in working through one of these NEPA processes with a federal agency? What do you feel is, where is the holdup from your end? What can we do even better now? Anybody? And if you get rid of the lawyers, that's good with me. I'm all right. Yes?
There's a rule, you have to wait for the mic. Not for me, just for the mic.
I've answered the same
So I'm a consultant and I work for counties on their behalf as their representative at the table for cooperating agencies. One of the things that we have seen in this process is the condensed timeframes, which are great. Projects are moving faster, but it also is affecting counties' ability to review as well, because, and we need to own some of that if we want it to go faster, but in some instances we had a 3-day turnaround time. In some instances we had a 6-day turnaround time. And so we've been trying to work with the BLM to, at least if we have those short time frames, to highlight the changes that were made in the documents or try to help us focus where we need to focus.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's been very challenging is when we receive documents, BLM is on such a tight time frame to get them turned around, we don't always see the complete document. So we only get portions of the review for the preliminary review, which is sometimes not always helpful because we don't have particular information that affects the analysis and we're not able to comment on it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I share your concerns on that because it also comes when I've got 13 or 14 of these all going at the same time, and then I have a briefing coming up and I've got to read this one by this date, and a lot of it is just having the time to read the documents. But I think one of the things, to be involved with your BLM partners earlier and talking with them, obviously there's some stuff that they're just going to have to do and the time frame is going to be there, but it's all about the relationship and how that works. And many times the pieces of the documents are important because those are some of the issues that they really need your inputs on. And some of the other stuff might not be as much, but it's kind of like you can have it quick and cheap and durable, but you only get to pick 2, maybe, or 1, only 1. So that's a difficulty. One more question? Yes.
No, against the rules.
So in regards to environmental assessments, I know this addressed EISs. The question has been, when does the time clock start and what is the exact time frame on EAs?
So I think Tyson is going to be talking a little bit about that coming up, but I can, is that part of your?
Same rule.
Same, sorry.
Yeah, so mine doesn't really cover EAs either, but what we've been told is that we have 6 months to complete an EA, but when that clock starts is fairly discretionary, so it's up to the authorized officer in that field office to determine, whether we have approved application, whether we have enough information to actually start the process. So like a lot of other things in NEPA, it depends.
Yeah, but for environmental assessments in particular, depending on the nature of the project, many of them can be done now much faster than they used to be. And I give you a couple of different examples. There was recently an adverse, and typically this comes from adverse decisions from courts where they're saying, your NEPA wasn't good enough, you've got to go back. And we had one out of the district court in DC, which challenged lease sales in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. And the Wyoming lease sale was the first part of that, and there the judge said, you didn't, and that was a leasing decision from 2015 or 16 time frame. So it was an older leasing decision, and in that case, the judge said, you didn't look at downstream, so the expected use of the oil and gas that would be produced and the greenhouse gas emissions that would be associated with that, you didn't look at that when you offered these parcels for lease. The department does that now. We do that, we include that analysis now. So we went back in that case and did an environmental assessment focused specifically on the question where the court said you didn't do this properly. And we fixed it, and that took like 6 weeks, I think. It was out. It was before we even got to the scheduling conference with the plaintiffs in that on looking at the remedy. We said we fixed it. We've done that with other things. We had a recent remand for the coal. We had a coal moratorium in a previous administration. The next administration lifted that. We had a judge in Montana decide that that decision needed to have NEPA analysis, which we didn't agree with, but we thought we can fix this faster than it would take to appeal to the Ninth Circuit. And that EA was out in less than a month for public comment. It's still out there now. But so those are specific instances of fixing stuff with EAs, but just for a standard EA, it's typically they're faster than 6 months now. But the start point, as Tyson mentioned, we want to try to front load as much work as possible, so then when we officially start, we make it within that time frame.
Phil, I have a quick question, just kind of a follow-up on that. When you say an EIS or an EA, or an EIS should be completed within 1 year, an EA ideally 6 months, at what point does the clock start ticking?
So it starts for an EIS from when the notice of intent is published in the Federal Register. And so we've had a couple of those go through 2 recent reservoir projects that Tyson's worked on and some other people here have worked on, where they went through within a year. So it's the notice of intent. So on one of my previous slides, there's certain things that happen before the notice of intent is published. There's a lot of work that's going on, kind of front loading, to try to make sure that we can hit those timeframes. So, but it's when it's published in the Federal Register.
So just to follow up on Drew's comment about the timeline, most commissioners have a second job. This is a paid volunteered position, I guess you would call commissioners. So the shorter timeline, I think, one of the observations that I think we're observing is it's going to require more professional staff, either through contracting or internally, to be able to meet those. If you had a month, you might be able to sit home at the kitchen table and digest some stuff. That's not necessarily bad. We're owning it. As Drew said, we want to own, and she's professional staff, so she loves it. But I think that's an observation that when you have 4 years, that's way too long, but you have time. And when you have 4 days, to do it right, I think you need to engage some professional staff at the local level, however and that's fine for the big ones, not always necessarily in the smaller ones, but I think that's one that we may be seeing as a consequence of the speed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think on some of the bigger ones, there can be waivers. For example, in Converse County, the Converse County project is on a slightly extended time frame because the operators, everybody went in saying, we're going to need a little more time to get this one right. So,
and the one other thing about the speedy time, I'm hoping a consequence of it is we continue to see power lines and pipelines divert around federal property and causing a bigger impact to the environment because they don't want to go through the process. And I think there's some industry people in here too. I'm hoping that this short time frame will open the door for logical lines instead of 90-degree turns. And got a fellow commissioner builds power lines, and there's 90s everywhere, and that's been an unintended consequence of the process. I'm hoping, and hoping is not a plan, but I'm hoping the shorter process will allow industry to say, let's take a net environmental less impact by going straight instead of 390s.
yeah, and I think that remains to be seen, but we're seeing some signs now that it used to be, oh my God, if we have to do an EIS, it's going to take us 5 or 6 years. Now we're seeing, let's get her done. I mean, we've had cases where the department and the BLM have determined it's appropriate to use an EA, and we've had industry people say, hey, we don't care if you do an EIS. We're good with that. So that's happening, I think, but it remains to be seen, and we'll have more data on it. One more up here in the front?
We do have time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
Phil, I may have cut you off a little early, so.
Thanks, Bailey. Sure, this is Mark Newcomb from Teton County Commission. I'm curious about the methods that, or what is out there and what's allowed, like the FONSI, the CADX, and the DNA that are used in place or not in place of, but that can be used, can be available. What is, let me try and get to the question, I guess. What is the standard for evaluating those decisions? Does it require that hard look, which is in the eye of the beholder too?
To an extent. So for statutory categorical exclusions, those are in statutes where Congress has said, this is something you don't need to go through NEPA for. So on that one, it's a binary. You meet whatever Congress said or you don't. And a perfect example of that is Section 390 of the Energy Policy Act from 2005. That had certain categorical exclusions for oil and gas development that if you met these conditions, you qualify for that Cat X. We had litigation on that in Wyoming in the previous administration where BLM then put a gloss of policy on top of the statute and said, well, you only get to use this if, and it had extra things added on. And in that case, Judge Friedenthal here, she looked at it and said, there's no direct line from the statute to what BLM's trying to do, so you can't really do that. You would have had to do a regulation to change, and that was the old leasing policy. So for categorical exclusions, you've got to look and see, do they meet the criteria that's laid out either in the statute or in the regulations that have those Cat X's. And a lot of them are for things that are pretty minor, that don't have a huge impact cumulatively, or that the impact has already been identified in a previous NEPA document. DNAs are a little bit different because they're, I think the Forest Service uses SIRS, Supplemental Information Reports, sometimes, not as much anymore. Okay, so we'll learn about how the Forest Service does it. But so DNA, a documentation of NEPA adequacy, that is not a NEPA analysis. That's not a NEPA document, but it's just saying our old NEPA document was good enough. So in a DNA situation, it is a hard look back, and people will say, no, you don't, that old NEPA is not good enough anymore. So you do have that. So a Cat X is a little, if you can have a Cat X, that's like a red light, green light. A DNA is a little bit different, and then tiering or incorporating by reference, you can use a larger NEPA analysis or some other analysis and pull that information in so you don't have to analyze it separately in your EIS. A good example of that is in the Powder River Basin Coal Review, where BLM has gathered information, has it out on the web and said, here's all the air quality information up in the Powder River Basin, here's water quality stuff. Then for a decision in that area, they can say, we're gonna incorporate by reference this material that shows what those impacts are. And then tiering is another piece of the process, which I'm not sure if we'll get into in more detail, but tiering essentially uses a larger NEPA document like an EIS, and the prime example is for oil and gas leasing. You have a resource management plan that had an EIS that identified the significant environmental effects of allocating an area as open to oil and gas leasing. So then you can have an EA say, now I'm going to look at the specific effect of offering a tract in this particular location, and I am going to tier back to the larger EIS. So those are the kind of concepts. So Cat X's are, they either are or they aren't. DNAs, you've got to go back and look at the existing NEPA document. Tiering and incorporating by reference, that gets a little more fuzzy, and it relates back to whether the analysis was good enough. So I hope it helps clarify it.
Are there any other questions? Another question?
Thanks. I guess, in your opinion,
I don't have an opinion. Remember my disclaimer?
yeah. No, you have an opinion, it just doesn't represent anybody else. How did we get to this point where we're producing 32,000 page EISs? Oh. And when we have another change in administration, how are we going to keep from going back to that?
Well, you know, the pendulum always swings. The end part of that is the pendulum always swings. For those of you who have been involved in sage-grouse planning, you're intimately aware of how that moves. The pendulum swings, it never stops in the middle. And so how do you essentially avoid repeating the mistakes of the past or the mistakes of the future, however you want to view it? That again it's all part of the engagement of citizens essentially in this process, so that if in the future someone wants to do a 32,000 page EIS, you've got to push back and say, why? What's the purpose of NEPA? Why are we doing this? And again, I think having seen how things change, as long as we stick, I think Commissioner Short was saying, as long as we stay within the sideboards of the process, we're going to be okay on things. There's a lot of discretion for federal decision makers. It's when we try to push out, too far out, that then we get into trouble with it. But the other part of this is that we have, we've got these three branches of government. And the federal agencies are in the executive branch, and we're trying to do what Congress has told us to. So if Congress could fix this, and with Fast 41, they tried. They said for these big infrastructure projects, you're not going to take that long. You're going to do it faster. You're going to report on it. You're not going to have an open-ended statute of limitations or 6-year statute of limitations. You're going to really push things. So they did that for big infrastructure. So Congress tells the Department of Interior what to do. And then we do within the discretion Congress has. But then we have judges, that other branch. And that other branch, in some cases, is requiring us to take a much harder look than we ordinarily would take. And that is just how, things shape up. Again, it's until there's pushback on particular decisions, it's hard to say. So I think this is a real effort to move the process forward in an efficient manner. And I think we're doing a good job on it. And I think you're going to start to see that. I mean, I think with our reservoir projects here in Wyoming, we did a pretty good job. It's still not done yet, but we got those moving forward. We're going to see with some of the larger projects like the Pipeline Corridor Initiative, some of those other larger ones, we'll see how that goes. But ultimately, it's up to all of us to be able to say, we don't really need a 32,000-page document for this. Or if we do, at least we agree on it. And maybe the agreement is going to be the most difficult thing. You're never going to get that. So, but again, that was just my personal opinion, not anything related to anything else.
Any other questions? I have one quick question, Phil.
Sure.
And I may be putting you on the spot here, but I wondered if you might talk a little bit about the role that contractors or consultants play in preparing NEPA documents in the context of a conversation that we've been having here in Wyoming about the state and the counties maybe taking on more of a role in preparing NEPA documents. We have some examples at the conservation district level of districts preparing EAs in cooperation with the BLM, and there's been talk at the state level about maybe states taking on the role of actually doing the contracting and overseeing that work, or maybe preparing parts of an EA or EIS. I wondered if you might talk about that.
Okay, yeah, we could talk about that all day long, because that's a topic that's very interesting, because again, the NEPA process, it's the obligation of the deciding federal agency to comply with NEPA. Typically they can have, and BLM often uses what's called a third-party contracting process, where we're not contracting with an environmental consulting firm or a consultant or anything like that under what's called the federal acquisition regulations. That's all the federal law for offering a contract. We don't do it like that for NEPA. It's specific. Instead, we say to a project proponent, you can hire someone to do this work and you can pay them, but they're going to have to do the work for BLM, and you're not going to be able to have an undue influence on them other than paying the bills. So that's at the EIS level. There are a couple of cases. The most, we had one in Wyoming. It was with Stanley Energy, where they were doing an EIS, and this was 3 governors ago, and they were pushing their contractor, the Forest Service contractor, in a particular way that governor did not like and called them on it. We had a situation in Colorado where it was on a land exchange, and the contractor had inappropriate communications with the project proponent to the point where there's a federal court case on it. And some of the things where the contractor was saying, well, can you get us tickets to sit in your box for the Redskins game, and we'll make sure that we get this alternative is going to be the way you like it. Those kind of things happen. So that's a really tough one with third-party contracting on the EIS level. On the EA level, NEPA provides that you can have an applicant-prepared EA. The BLM is still going to have to own it. They're still going to have to go through and review it and make sure it's going to be their decision. But you can have, if there's a, let's try to work through a hypothetical. Maybe there's a range improvement project that a county wants to do, and BLM doesn't have the resources right now to put that in the front of the queue for NEPA analysis. The county could say, we're going to propose to do this, and we're going to hire somebody to do an EA for it, and we're going to provide that EA to you, BLM. BLM's then going to have to review that EA and make sure it's okay. But that can be done. That could be done. You could go through that. It's part of it is just stepping up. And I know there are a couple of field managers here and assistant district managers and deputy state directors who could talk about that experience as we move forward. But it's part of it is on our current administration really likes cooperative federalism, that you can work together. Sage grouse is a great example of the recent amendment to the plans where it really takes into account much more what the state's role is in this process. And here again, if there's a particular project and you want to bring it up with your local BLM field office and say, here's what we would like to do, NEPA will provide you with a way to do that. Of course, the devil's going to be in the details. So, but yeah, if you want to read some interesting cases, you can look at the third-party contractors where they've been challenged as not being neutral in their analysis because of inappropriate contacts from the people. The Wolf Creek Pass ski area, well, Red McComb is the developer from Texas, and it's down in Colorado, but that case is just like a horror show to read, and you know, you look at it and you say, we don't want to be in that situation, one way or the other. We good with time?
Any other questions?
Well, again, I'd like to thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Phil, for that insight, and thanks to the audience for thoughtful questions. Hopefully we have an easier, gentler clicker here now. Sorry about the touchy clicker there, Phil. I want to take care of a couple other housekeeping items. For those speakers who are willing to share, the presentations will be available on WCCA's website. And then I also wanted to let you all know and our future speakers know that we are recording these presentations and they will also be posted to the website. So if you wanted to go back and review them, or if there's others who weren't able to join us today, they'll be there. Great. Our next two speakers are Tyson Finicum and David Loomis. Tyson, who is going to speak first, is a natural resource specialist for the BLM Casper's Fluid Mineral Program. Before that, he served as a planning and environmental specialist, where he worked on major projects at the state and national levels, including the 2015 Greater Sage Grouse Amendments and BLM's 2016 planning rule. He has also been at the forefront of DOI's NEPA streamlining initiative. So I will turn it over to Tyson now. Sorry?
Are we going to break first, or do you want to just jump?
Do you all want a break? Let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back here in about 15. Thanks, Tyson.
Yeah. All right, I think it's about time to get started again. Bailey's not going to introduce me again, but I think I can introduce myself. As she already told you, my name is Tyson Finicum, and I am most currently a natural resource specialist in our BLM Casper field office. So up until about a month ago, I was a planning and NEPA specialist in our Wyoming state office, providing guidance and policy to the field offices. During my 7 years at the state office, about 5 of those being in the planning and NEPA shop, I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of our big initiatives, both at the state and the national levels. During this time, I've watched the NEPA program come full circle. I think when I started in the planning shop, we had about 17 EISs on our NEPA hot sheet. Since then, we've had a few that have since been withdrawn, but a lot have been completed. Right now, BLM Wyoming has about 7 EISs in progress, and not including those 7 EISs, we've had about 4 EISs that have been completed since the issuance of Secretarial Order 3355. So complying with the orders has been challenging, as you would expect, but it's also been really exciting to see these projects that have just been sitting on the shelf for so long, seeing them move, seeing them get completed. And then it's also been fun, working with others and just navigating these orders that we've been giving and trying to make everything work. So what I wanted to do for my segment was build on Phil's presentation and touch a little bit on the NEPA and planning processes, BLM zone processes, but then dive a little bit deeper into some of the best practices that we can employ to try to meet the secretarial orders, and then also talk a little bit about how you all as partners fit into the equation. All right, just really quickly, I would like to touch on what the BLM does and why we do the things that we do. So the BLM has a large and complex responsibility, which is managing about 245 million acres of federal lands and about 700 million acres of subsurface mineral estate. The challenge lies in the mission, which is to manage public lands on behalf of all Americans while recognizing the local and regional consequences its decisions may have, in conformity with federal laws, regulations, and policies, while also accommodating local needs, values, and laws. So here in Wyoming, BLM manages about 18.4 million acres of federal lands and about 41.6 million acres of mineral estate. So from checkerboard down in the high desert district to split estate up in Commerce County, sage-grouse habitat, wild horses, we kind of got it all. So how do we account for all these competing resources and decide what goes where or how we do certain things in certain areas? Well, all of this is laid out in our resource management plans. As Phil discussed, the planning process is guided by FLTMA, which requires that BLM lands are managed for multiple use and sustained yield. And as I alluded to, the approved RMP provides the framework for how BLM lands are administered. So the planning process, as I said, unites FLTMA in NEPA. So, like I said, the planning process is guided by FLTMA, and then NEPA is kind of the vehicle for how we get to a resource management plan. So we use the NEPA process to identify competing resource uses and then develop and analyze alternatives for managing these resources. The planning process helps us meet our multiple use and sustained yield mission. I went way back. So generally there are two types of decisions that are made in RMPs. So the first being desired outcomes in the form of goals and objectives. So these usually come from law, regulation, and policy. Goals are broad statements that describe the desired outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And these are typically not measurable. Objectives, on the other hand, are a little bit more specific, yet still broad, and may include some measurable components. The second type of decisions or decisions that we make are allocation decisions and management decisions. So management actions or management decisions are typically proactive measures or limitations to guide BLM activities. So allowable uses or allocations generally have more of a spatial component and identify where land uses are allowed, restricted, or prohibited. So desired outcomes direct what we're trying to achieve. Management actions and allocations are how we get there. So, like I said, NEPA is the vehicle for how we get to an RMP. So really quick before I get into the NEPA process, I just wanted to talk briefly, and Phil kind of mentioned this as well, but just talking about the stated NEPA the stated purpose of NEPA documents, which comes from our NEPA implementing regulations at 40 CFR 1500.1. So the first bullet, of course, a major driver of NEPA is to inform and involve the public. So subsection B of this part directs that procedures ensure that environmental information is available to not only the public officials, but our public citizens. And then jumping down to the next bullet, that NEPA documents concentrate on the issues that are truly significant to the action rather than amassing needless detail. And subpart C says that NEPA's purpose is not to generate paperwork, as Phil said, even if it's excellent paperwork, so. But to foster excellent action. In these documents, we really want to focus on helping the decision maker make decisions that are based on understanding of the environmental consequences at hand. So here's a simple chart of the NEPA process. So with all these policies that Phil talked about, the Secretarial Order 3355, the President's executive order, pushing us to conclude EISs faster, what has actually changed with our process? The answer is technically nothing. So our regulations are still the same. They may change, but right now we're working under the framework that NEPA and our regulations provide. So publication of the notice of intent to prepare an EIS is still kind of our kicking off point. That starts typically a 30 to 45 day public scoping period. And then once that concludes, we prepare the draft EIS and publish that, which kicks off a mandatory minimum 45-day public comment period, or for planning projects, whether that be a revision or an EIS level amendment, a 90-day public comment period. After that is finished, we compile public comments, build the final EIS, and publish that. In project level NEPA, that typically carries a 30-day public availability period before we can issue a record of decision. For planning projects, we have a 30-day public protest period, which also has a 60-day concurrent governor's consistency review, where the governor of the state or states can raise issues through that channel. So within this process, some of the major milestones for public participation are scoping, commenting on the draft EIS, and then providing input during the protest period or other administrative remedy periods. As you can see on the left here, the potential to-do list for cooperating agencies is a little bit more lengthy. Cooperators will be asked to meet prior to scoping, participate in meetings, help formulate alternatives and analyze impacts, and then, of course, everybody's favorite, which is reviewing preliminary documents. So here are just some examples of where the cooperating agency workload points would be within the process that I just described. So these should all be spelled out within your memorandum of understanding, but really quickly, just some are scoping and outreach to constituents, data assembly, gathering, providing us data, impact analysis, whether that be reviewing or actually physically helping us with the impact analysis. And then also formulating alternatives and suggesting methods for resolving conflicts. So going back to my original NEPA chart, you know, like I said, the process really hasn't changed. So we're taking, like Phil said, a document that would typically take like upwards of 6 years to complete and narrowing that down to 1 year. Something's got to give. So what I just wanted to do here was stress the importance of collaboration and coordination early in the process. So before we start, before we issue an NOI. In the past, we had very often typically used the NOI as the kickoff point, which it still technically is, but we'd often wait for the NOI to go out to maybe inform the public or gather feedback, or even sometimes waiting to connect with cooperators. So that leads me into my streamlining best management practices. So the tasks on this first slide are a little more on the BLM side, but some of them may need cooperator input or some level of coordination at some point. But whether it's an externally driven project or internally driven, like a plan revision or an amendment, we should have enough information to start crafting our purpose and need. So this is really important to do early in the process so we can identify our scope, and then going forward, it'll help us achieve some of these other pre-NOI things that we're gonna try to do. And then we should also be narrowing down our potential schedule. So when we may potentially be starting with the NOI, and then all the things that happened between there and record of decision. And then also identifying budget needs, especially if we're gonna be requesting money. And then that leads me to my next bullet, which is identifying and securing contracting needs. So there's a lot of needs here, a lot of things that we have to do, but getting a contractor on board early is really helpful in helping us kind of manage the process and get some of these things accomplished. And then at this time, early in the process, we also want to be starting to think about our decision file management. So establishing a system for how we're going to manage documents and the information that we're compiling going into the process. So probably the most important key to success in the process is early engagement, especially you know, when we're starting early. So well before we actually start the process, we want to start notifying our regular partners, the county commissioners, the state of Wyoming agencies, folks like that, and then also start reaching out to agencies that might need to be involved. So like Fish and Wildlife Service or EPA. It's also important that we figure out who's on board with us, and then within those individual agencies that are going to be working with us, who exactly is the point of contact for that agency, so there's no confusion moving forward. And then going into my next bullet, establishing MOUs early is not only a time saver, but like I kind of said, it just helps solidify who's on board. So as Phil mentioned, the BLM Wyoming has an umbrella MOU with the state of Wyoming that designates them as a cooperating agency for all NEPA, essentially, mostly planning and EISs, but some EAs as well. So how this works, with this IM that I have up there, we have a checklist that has all the state agencies, and then in conjunction with that, the BLM actions that they may be interested in. So we get a project in the door and we'll notify these agencies, and then in return, they give us what level of involvement they would like. So whether they want to be like a full cooperator, whether they just want to have some knowledge of the project, or, you know, leave me alone, like we'll get the next project. So as you would expect, this has been super helpful in establishing cooperators early in the process. But probably more importantly than the time savings that it provides, it also memorializes the partnership between the BLM and the state of Wyoming, that we're working on all of these together. And then the BLM Wyoming has a template MOU with the county commissioners. So we developed this with the County Commissioners Association a while back. So it provides a starting point. It's not as expedient as the deal that we have with the state, but it cuts out a lot of the back and forth that typically can occur with trying to execute an MOU. And then other opportunities. So recently, Bailey, with the association, has approached us about exploring a similar method that we have with the state, with the counties. So the situation here is a little bit different than what we'd have with the state. So additional conversations need to be had, some things would need to be worked out, but I think it's something that we could maybe look forward to coming up on the horizon. So a critical part of pre-planning is the identification of data needs and the collection of information. So looking at a project at hand, you know, what data are we going to need for this project? What do we have already? You know, what's readily accessible? And then where are the big holes? So major delays can occur if maybe we have to go out and conduct an inventory that we didn't already account for, or if some important information comes to us, especially after we publish a draft EIS, that we may have to go back and address. So we want to know this type of stuff as early as possible so we can account for it and get ahead of it. And then once we figure out where the gaps are, we can go about filling them. So whether that be reaching out to our cooperators, maybe interested tribes, or the public, there's different avenues that we have for getting the information that we need. And then I added this last bullet as a reminder that when we say data collection, we're not always talking about geospatial data or published reports. You know, for example, if we're working on a plan, we want to know like where those special areas are in the community and why they're important to the community, or if there's like traditional knowledge that's being passed down through generations of working in an area or recreating in an area. We want to know all that information as early as possible so we can account for it when we're going into formal scoping. So an underutilized tool that's in our box that will likely become more popular, especially in planning, I would foresee, is pre-NOI little s scoping. So we're still required to provide a public scoping period once we kick off with an NOI. But getting, like I've been talking about, just gathering this information early is extremely important in our never-ending quest for data. So, and the type of outreach that we could do would obviously be tailored to the project that we're working on. So for planning, for example, maybe doing like a workshop or an open house type format, or for like an externally driven project, maybe doing some kind of listening session where, you know, we provide information and then, you know, we can receive questions as well. So just two-way communication. And then we also have things like the BLM website and social media outlets that allow us to let folks know what's coming up. So if we're using the NOI repeatedly as the first line of notification for people, everything after that is reactionary. So generally, people don't like surprises or surprises like this, maybe like surprise cake or something. But but surprises like that, what they may result in is getting information late that we, like I talked about before, that we have to go back and address. So early notification, early engagement, I think just helps smooth everything out going forward. And then this last bullet here, sometimes we just need to look at other tools that are outside of our normal cookie cutter, like public forum type thing. And I put this, so the Eastern Colorado RMP story map. So BLM Colorado is trying out this story map idea, which if we had a little bit more time, I would click on the link and show you guys. But it's pretty cool, and it shows the RMP revision that BLM Colorado is contemplating, and shows their alternatives and the resources that they're looking at. So this particular example, they're using for their draft EIS and draft RMP, but I could see something like this being useful early in the process so we can convey information and also receive it. So my last slide of BMPs here don't really fit with the same pre-NOI theme that I've been talking about, but they're practices that we're trying to achieve and move more towards that I think it's important for you all to know as reviewers and as contributors. So when one of our documents come across your desk with one of these things, you're not like, what the heck, where's the rest of your document? The first is something that Phil talked about a little bit, and the department is really big on. And in theory, it should be one of the easiest ways to reduce pages, but it's just eliminating a lot of the redundancy that we see in our NEPA documents. So if you read one of our lofty EISs, like Phil talked about, you've seen the multiple discussions of the history and the procedures of the NHPA or something like that. So how many times do we need to say that in a document, or if at all? There's a lot of resources out there that already do this that we can point towards. So that leads me to my next bullet. So one of the first questions that we should be asking when we're evaluating a proposal and starting to sit down and do the NEPA is if there's any existing documents out there that we can tier to. So if there's a fresh plan out there or a programmatic EIS that we can work under and potentially do an EA where we would typically do an EIS otherwise. And if not, are there existing documents out there that we can incorporate by reference? This isn't just a page saver, but it's also a time saver. So, it takes less time to write the document, and it reduces the amount of pages and text that we're putting on those pages. And then my next one here, so issue-based NEPA is a concept that we're starting to see a little more of in Wyoming. So other states are a little ahead of the game, or some offices are in employing issue-based NEPA, but we're starting to see it more in environmental assessments. But the same concept can be applied to EISs. So if we had more time, I would provide a issue-based NEPA course for you guys. But in short, it just brings back NEPA to the original intent of NEPA, as I talked about earlier. So focusing on the issues that are at hand without amassing needless detail. And then my last one here, it's also a little more of a time saver than a page reducer, but really it can do both. So the sense that I had for a long time, and which I think a lot of other people share with me, is that you can't do really anything with the physical document until we kick off the NOI, and that's not necessarily true. Early in the process, we should have enough information. We should have introductory information, purpose and need. We should have those things developed, and we can start working on Chapter 1. And then if we did our pre-NOI homework like I talked about, we should also have a starting point for alternatives. So we can start on Chapter 2. And then Chapter 3, which is our affected environment, all that does is describe the baseline conditions of the area that we're looking at. We should have all that information already. So just starting on some of that work before we kick off an NOI. And then I assumed you all would get a copy of my presentation, so I provided some of the key NEPA and planning BLM resources. The two top ones being the NEPA handbook and the planning handbook. And then the BLM's desk guide to cooperating agency relationships is also really helpful. And that is it. So David and I were talking, and I think we might just wait until after both of us do our presentations, and then we'll do a group questions. Okay? All right, thank you.
Actually, my name is Joel Boosman. I am the oldest surviving member of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association.
It's Bousman, but close. Thank you, Tyson. David is the NEPA program leader for the Forest Service Rocky Mountain region and has worked as a NEPA specialist in other Forest Service offices. He has long been an advocate for county involvement in federal land use analysis and decision making, and he's going to talk to you about NEPA in the Forest Service context. So, thanks, David.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the efforts of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I've worked with a number of, in a number of different states for the Forest Service and with the BLM previously. And I think this County Commissioner Association has spent more time and effort in ensuring that the county commissioners of Wyoming are, I think, the best informed about federal land policy and management of any state in the country. So hats off to the longtime efforts of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. One thing I wanted to mention about the National Environmental Policy Act is that in the preamble to it, it stresses that its direction to the federal agencies to work in cooperation with state and local agencies. And it also says that we're to figure out how man and nature can work in productive harmony. And I think the word productive is important. So this is the National Environmental Policy Act, not the National Environmental Protection Act, because it talks about productive harmony. So it's production that comes off the federal lands that's important to the act too. It's not just a protection act. One of the things I wanted to mention about the cooperating agency process that you've heard a little bit from Tyler and Phil already about is that there's a process for bringing counties in as cooperating agencies on federal projects. And what I mean by low bar here is that there's two main things that we need to look at in terms of bringing a cooperating agency in. And one is do they have jurisdiction by law over the same project that the federal agency is working on? And two, do they have expertise in a particular area that the environmental analysis will be looking at? And if you think about counties, we have shared jurisdiction across the Forest Service on all of our lands to some degree with all the counties that also have jurisdiction over those lands. And secondly, in terms of expertise, there's a ton of expertise that counties have that the federal agencies don't have. And I think most often and most clear is expertise in terms of the social and economic conditions in those counties. So there's almost always a bar that counties have exceeded in terms of being able to be cooperating agencies with the federal government. And one thing that's a little bit different in the Forest Service is that while we do many MOUs with our cooperating agencies, we look at those as more of a tool that's available to us to work together with counties, but we don't require an MOU. And I know that there's been some examples of counties in Wyoming that have preferred not to go through the formality of an MOU, and we've brought them in as cooperating agencies anyway. So there's there's different tools out there for bringing cooperating agencies, and if the formal MOU is not preferred by one of the counties, then we'll be glad to work with other means of accomplishing that. So just walking through the National Environmental Policy Act process here, and what we're going to be going over here is first, there's in the development of a proposal in the first place. So we get a lot of proposals coming in from outside applicants. These could be mining firms, they could be people that want to put in power lines, down to people that want a driveway across Forest Service land to their private property. But we also get a number of proposals from counties themselves. Sometimes you need rights-of-way, other kinds of lands actions that will support your operations. The scoping process, we can benefit significantly from county input in that. Also touch base with us at the draft EIS, and one of the things that's, we certainly encourage all of your comments on a draft environmental impact statement. And what's most helpful to us is that those comments are substantive. There are some organizations out there that treat the comment process as voting, and so we get like these mass mailings and sometimes hundreds of thousands of comments that all say the same thing. And those are far less useful to us as a well thought out comment from a county that outlays a good solid position and suggests improvements in the way we can look at our environmental analysis. Once that's completed, we evaluate those comments, and sometimes we look to our cooperating agencies to help us determine if a comment justifies looking at it, bringing up another alternative or changing the conclusions of our analysis. And the decision stage, all federal agencies working with cooperating agencies reserve the final decision-making authority, but we certainly need county input, local government input, and to helping us make sure that that's the best decision for everybody. And finally, there's the implementation and monitoring part of the cooperating agency process. The formal part of the NEPA cooperating agency process ends with the completion of the signing of a decision. But there are provisions in other laws, such as the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, which provide for long-term cooperative monitoring of conditions to make sure that we are implementing things in the way that we said we were and that we're getting the desired outcomes. So as I mentioned, there are projects that the county comes to us for. A lot of the Forest Service work is on projects that we initiate. Most recently, really focusing in on fuels reduction work in the urban wildland interface. Those almost always involve significant local government involvement because we're talking about protecting subdivisions and local government infrastructure. The scoping process, amongst other things, is used to figure out which agencies would be good cooperators in a particular project. So if there's a project that comes out that's of interest to you, let us know early on that you want to be a cooperating agency, and through the scoping process, we'll determine whether that's going to work for us or not. Also, the development of in the development of alternatives, cooperating agencies are very helpful in that. We have our come up with what we think is the best proposal, but we need to understand what other alternatives counties and other cooperating agencies would like us to look at too. And finally, there's a provision in the Council on Environmental Quality Regulations that says that the public and counties can help us establish time limits. So if there's a need to get a project done quickly, you can suggest time limits to us, and we can work out time limits that will work for everybody. And that's intended to decrease the amount of time. We're not talking about extending it further. Alternatives, so if you're helping us work with alternatives, just keep in mind that we are trying to make sure this process is properly focused on things that are reasonable. So be thinking about reasonable alternatives that the federal agency can actually implement on the ground. That's where we should all be spending our time and effort, on things that can actually really truly happen. And one thing that we think about with alternatives is, will adding another alternative to the analysis process add value to the process? So we don't want to be spending a lot of money evaluating alternatives that really are not adding any value to the decision-making process. So we want to keep the whole process within tight timeframes. We want to keep it efficient and effective. So those are some of the things that we think about when we're putting alternatives together. And as I mentioned before, the rule of reason applies here, and we want to make sure that the alternatives that we look at are implementable. So if you're working with us as a cooperating agency, make sure you think about the decision-making processes that we're going to go through too, in terms of reasonableness and implementability. Just invented a new word, I think. In the analysis of alternatives, this is where your special expertise can come in. And I think most commonly that expertise falls into social and economic impacts. So that's where we can really benefit from having a lot of input from the county in terms of the analysis of impacts. And we know there's a lot of other expertise that you bring in terms of natural resources and other effects that we analyze as well. In figuring out the range of impacts to consider, the scoping process, we need to be focusing in on those items that are most important to the decision to be made. So if a particular project is not going to be affecting water quality to any great extent, we don't want to get into pages and pages of analysis on water quality. So the scoping process, with the help of cooperating agencies, helps us figure out what are the 4 or 5 most important things that we need to analyze that will have the most effect on the decision-making process. So we can use your help there too. And one thing I like to remind people is that the more time and money we spend on analysis means that there's less time and money that we're going to be able to devote to on-the-ground actions like cleaning out the toilets or doing fuels work in the urban interface. And another thing to think about is we are under direction to use best available science, so the analysis that we do needs to include a consideration of what's the best available science out there, so the quality of the data matters to us. In the review of draft environmental impact statements, you certainly have an opportunity, along with everybody else, to provide official county comments. Yeah, but we can provide for more in-depth county involvement in the whole process with or without the official cooperating agency tag put on it. In other words, you don't need to sign that MOU in order to become involved in the environmental impact statement process. Some of the other things that you could assist us with as a cooperating agency would be things like having joint county Forest Service meetings, helping us with public involvement processes. And you can also assist us in the response to comments to make sure that we're taking into consideration county needs when we're responding to the public comments that we get. So what's good intergovernmental, interagency involvement? One is that we're devoting appropriate amount of time and money to it. We only have so many resources to bring to bear on any given project. We need to be devoting the correct amount of resources to working with the public and the county. One thing that's probably even more important is that we need to have constant, ongoing involvement with the counties and with the public. It's not just intended to be when we do a big EIS or a big NEPA process. Involvement with the county needs to be an ongoing effort, not just during an EIS process where we bring you in as a cooperating agency. It needs to be for just doing monitoring and not just during the main environmental processes. It should be a two-way communication process. So it's not just the Forest Service educating the county about what we do, but also the county educating the Forest Service. And this is, in my opinion, I think the involvement of local elected officials is critical to the entire process, because you bring along the collective opinions of your constituencies, and those are our constituencies too. You're more familiar with your local constituencies, and so we need that input from local elected officials. Talked about earlier, this is not a voting process. It's all about doing solid environmental analysis, making sure that decisions are well informed. One thing that's critical in the whole process is that we use clear, understandable language. There's a lot of federal government gobbledygook that kind of gets into some of our processes. Some of us in the federal agencies have been fighting that for years. We try our best, and we know even counties occasionally slip into 5-syllable words, but we try to communicate in as simple, plain way as we can. But I think probably most importantly is that the engagement between the Forest Service and counties as cooperating agencies, what really matters is, does this have a positive effect on the decision to be made? So does it help us make a better decision? That's where the rubber really meets the road. So this is just my opinion here too, is that, so this is beyond cooperating agencies. Cooperating agency is a legal process that's built into the National Environmental Policy Act. But I have seen situations where we've engaged counties for quite some time and gone beyond the point of where we need to sit down and have a formal agreement in it, and we just work together. So think about that. So one of the fun things I got to do in the last year or so was this is not going to sound fun to you guys at all, but it's the Washington office asked me to come back and help them rewrite the NEPA directives or handbooks and manuals and regulations. So I spent most of the last 6 months of 2017 working on that, and those regulations have been working their way through the Office of Management and Budget and the various White House agencies, and ever since then, it's a very time-consuming, difficult process to change regulations. But one of the things that the Forest Service decided to do was to undertake that challenge, and in a way, it deals with the pendulum question I think that came up earlier about well, how do we make sure some of these positive changes survive in the future? And one way of doing that is to put them into the regulations, because it's really hard to change regulations. And so that's one of the things that the Forest Service has decided to do in our approach to streamlining the NEPA process. And kind of the bottom line of it is we want to spend more time and money getting work done on the ground, increasing the scope and scale of the work that we get done on the ground, including urban interface fuels projects and restoration of vegetation management conditions. And the idea is in order to do that, we need to spend less money on the analysis and decision-making processes. So shifting from analytical processes to getting work done on the ground. And I'm not going to go over all of the regulatory changes that we have proposed. There's 40 or 50 of them. And just to hit a few highlights, things that have caught quite a bit of attention so far. One of them is condition-based management. So one of the goals of the Forest Service, as I just mentioned, is to increase the scope and scale of the work that we get done on the ground. And we need regulatory tools to be able to accomplish that. So one of them is called condition-based management. And what it says is when we're talking about doing like a large fuels reduction project, we don't need to necessarily identify exactly what we're going to be doing on every acre of that project, but rather we identify what treatments we would be applying based on the vegetation conditions that are in that particular area. So this allows us to work on a much broader, larger scale than we have in the past. And I want to mention the Tennessee Creek court case. This just came out of the 10th Circuit Court, which was a legal test, basically, of condition-based management. And we got a successful decision out of that about 2 months ago. So it couldn't have come at a better time, given the fact that we're currently collecting public comments on our regulatory changes. So that's a very fortunate coincidence there for us. We're also looking at our public scoping process, and I think Phil had mentioned earlier, and I think Tyler did too, is that we need to get back to the basic intent of NEPA. For years, the Forest Service has required scoping processes that are in more detail than the rest of the federal government. And so we are talking, or we're proposing to reduce the level of scoping for smaller projects and instead focus in on those that have the most significant environmental effects. So continue the scoping process as required by the Council on Environmental Quality for environmental impact statements and eliminate those requirements for smaller scale projects that don't have significant environmental impacts, such as categorical exclusions and environmental assessments, which conclude with the finding of no significant impact. That does not mean that we are eliminating public involvement. We're continuing public involvement. Or public information about those projects is going to continue through our schedule of proposed actions process. So on all of our websites, we'll continue to provide that kind of information. And we're going to be relying more on the expertise, on the ground community knowledge of our forest supervisors and district rangers to determine what level of public involvement is most appropriate for those smaller scale projects. And we are also learning from our friends in the BLM and Department of the Interior about some streamlining processes that they've been using for years. And one of them that the Department of the Interior has been doing that we think is quite valuable, and we intend to adopt it in the Forest Service, is the determination of NEPA adequacy that Phil was talking about earlier. So we're proposing to include this in our regulations as well. So what this means is that for new projects, we can adopt an existing analysis. We can use an existing analysis, provided it meets certain conditions, which are listed here. They have to be similar kinds of projects. There has to be an adequate range of alternatives included in the existing analysis. There can't be significant new circumstances or changed conditions. And the adequacy of the analysis needs to be appropriate. We're also including a pretty big list of categorical exclusions. And those are focused mostly in on our special uses projects. Those would be things like power lines, as well as permitting recreation uses like bicycling events, things like that. And also for restoration projects, so this would include vegetation management, including harvest of trees for a variety of different reasons related to vegetation, and increase the amount of acreage that we would be able to categorically exclude from preparation of an EA or an environmental impact statement. And we have time for a few questions, I think.
So I actually have a question for each of you. So the Forest Service actually allows the opportunity for cooperating agencies to kind of participate in the process beyond just the cooperating agency status. They also, under certain circumstances, offer the opportunity to participate on the interdisciplinary team to draft the document, which is great. So to David, how does the Forest Service determine whether or not cooperating agencies should participate on the ID team? And for Tyson, why doesn't BLM afford that same opportunity in appropriate circumstances?
We leave that decision about whether a cooperating agency should participate on the interdisciplinary team to our local managers. So that would be our forest supervisors and district rangers. And they work it out with local government to figure out when it's appropriate and when it's not. We don't have a checklist of things that are required for that to happen. It's based on negotiations with our local managers.
Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing with BLM. So with working on an EIS or something like that we would typically contract out, we're already having all of these other specialists especially if you're talking about writing particular parts of a document, we're paying people to do this work for us. And then from the BLM perspective, the workload comes from the ID team checking to ensure that all of that, all the stuff that has been done is up to BLM standards. I wouldn't say that we don't allow for that to happen. I think there's cases, and I think during the BLM panel, we might hear about some of those with the Pinedale Field Office and the county, Suffolk County. But like David said, it's on a case-by-case kind of basis, and it's up to the official there in the field office. Whether that's a good fit, whether it's a county planner or somebody agency, fill that.
So this dovetails on the question just a little bit, and probably above your guys' pay grade, but because you're here, you get the question, and it might even be more appropriate later in this conference. But you're doing exactly the same thing. You're doing NEPA analysis, and you're doing it, I won't say entirely differently, but you're doing it differently. So from the ground level, the cooperators, is there a way that the Forest Service and the BLM and the other agencies could be more uniform? Not only this question, but others. Can that be a directive? I know you're different agencies, but could the CEQ be the one that says thou shalt do it the same way all the time, everywhere? And that's a broad statement. But I think some of us have more experience with BLM, and then we do a little bit of force, and that's different than those of us who do a lot of the force and the BLM. Is that a path that's possible? And why isn't it happening now? And it's a loaded question. I fully recognize it, but it's NEPA, but we're doing it differently. This is another part of the fun part of the conference. Did Phil raise his hand back here to address that too? I'll let you guys go first.
Okay. Well, I always like to do stuff over my pay grade, so I'll take a shot at it. So having worked for both agencies, the NEPA processes that they use are quite similar. But, there's a lot to be said, I think, in federal agencies for some differences because I think that, the BLM's process of having tight time limits on EAs and EISs is a great experiment in how to improve things. The Forest Service is taking a little bit different approach in how we're responding to the need for efficiency in terms of focusing in on our regulations. But we're going to learn from both the Forest Service experience in regulations and the BLM Department of Interior experience in those mandated restricted timeframes. And we'll find out which one works the best. And I suspect some kind of a amalgamation of them will probably be the best. So there's always a value in having different agencies try out different things and see how they work. So, think of it as a good learning process. Phil, go ahead.
Thanks. Well, one of the reasons why we can't do it one size fits all for everything is we have so many different federal courts looking at it. And what might be okay in one circumstance might not be okay in another. So that's part of it. But the other part of this is in looking at, for example, the CEQ has NEPA regulations. Anybody know the last time they updated their NEPA regs? Because if you look in their NEPA regs, they think an EA should be 15 pages long and an EIS should be less than 150. So they haven't updated things. There is some recent CEQ guidance. If you go to the CEQ website, they have their 40 questions, and it's about different NEPA topics. That hasn't been updated recently. They did come out just 2 weeks ago with draft guidance on assessing greenhouse gas emissions and climate in NEPA documents. And that's really important, but it seems like nobody was happy with that draft guidance because all it did was say, keep doing what you are doing, and it provided a lot of discretion to the agencies doing NEPA. But if you look at the news reports on that and things, everybody has their own impression of what it is. But CEQ could certainly help. But the other thing is there is some guidance at the Department of Interior level to focus interior agencies to have kind of one decision. So we don't have Fish and Wildlife Service making one decision on a project that BLM or Office of Surface Mining is involved with, so we have these separate decision making. We want to have things all wrapped up together, so we're trying that. But I think, as David said, the unique circumstances of this, it's not ever going to be one size fits all, but there is a lot of attention to trying to make it better. So.
I'm Beth Calloway with Governor Gordon's office. This is hearkening back to a comment that Bailey made earlier, and I think a lot of people in this room are aware of conversations about streamlining and how the state and counties can help in the process and facilitate things. And one of the things I haven't heard come up that I'd love to hear your thoughts on and anybody else's would be early on in the stages, are there opportunities for data coordination from cooperators to help push the analysis as far as we can get before it goes out to an NOI. I think that's one of the areas we're starting to hone in on, is possibly being something that may front load that level of an undertaking that both agencies have to do for NEPA. So I wonder if you guys have thoughts on that, or I would love to chat with people throughout the next couple days on data and then other additional ideas with that kind of concept too.
Yeah, so I tried to get at that a little bit in my presentation, but just that early coordination, cooperation, and then starting to work with our cooperators early in the process, so we can share data, we can collaborate on building this one data set, and then also getting into impact analysis, starting that early as well. And I thought of something after I had spoke before regarding your question, and something, everybody's always short-staffed. We're always complaining. You're wanting to do this faster. You're not giving us more staff. So what are different things that we can do to kind of account for this? And I think one of the things that I was thinking of was looking at certain resource areas where we may be lacking in a position or the workload to do something. Like in the Wyoming State Office, we just lost an air quality specialist. So looking at our partners, whether that be in the county or the conservation district, or in the state agencies, to kind of fill those voids that we're starting to sense.
One follow-up on the question Beth had. We keep, as counties, realizing the value of having up-to-date socioeconomic baseline data and having the ability to work with the federal agencies, so you have that before you prior to scoping. So once you get to the point of proposing a project, you already know what the economic situation is in the area that your proposal is happening in. Do you have suggestions to us as counties of any particular kind of information that we should be looking to have for data that would be even more helpful? I mean, we look at our socioeconomic baseline in maybe in a different framework than what you do as a federal agency. Any thoughts there?
Well, I know this has been a subject that the association has been looking into for quite some time, and I think we've all agreed that the expertise of the University of Wyoming, the economic expertise that they have, is a great source of data and information that I think we can all support. But beyond that, we are not social and economic experts, so I really can't get in more into the weeds than that.
Any other questions?
I'm Kimberly, I'm the field manager in Rock Springs, excuse me, for the BLM. I kind of wanted to address Beth's question from a manager standpoint. I think we need, management's all about risk, so, NEPA is a process law, so we need to make sure that when we look at streamlining, we don't bypass the process. So your question, Beth, about doing data analysis prior to scoping makes me nervous as a manager because then we're kind of going outside the process. There's a whole lot we can do, and Phil and David and Tyson have been doing a great job explaining kind of the streamlining and different things we can do, but I also think we need to keep in mind that the NEPA process needs to be followed. And so all these things we can do to help us prepare for that, but we can't go behind the scenes, do a NEPA analysis, and then present it to the public and not get public input and that kind of thing. So from a management standpoint, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there to make sure that we're keeping the NEPA process in mind.
Sorry to jump in, just to clarify my comment earlier, I think I probably misspoke when I said analysis, because they're being very careful about pre-decisional types of activities, but I think as far as like getting data coordinated, getting data ready, getting the metadata cleaned up, getting everything ready to go is more what I'm thinking.
A quick comment on the efforts of the WCCA in the past. At one point, there was a working group set up with the Forest Service, the BLM, and the WCCA to develop protocols for counties to be able to do that socioeconomic analysis. I believe we were quite a ways down the road and then kind of dropped off the map in Washington, so it might be a good idea to go back and review what happened, what was decided, and then finish the job.
I think Bailey is doing that exact thing at the moment, correct?
Yeah, we are working on it as far as socioeconomic data and trying to work with counties even across state lines to work with federal agencies on incorporating additional socioeconomic data. And also, as we'll discuss additionally down the road the next couple days, working with counties on developing county natural resource plans as well. I'm going to take one more question, and I've already tried to deprive you of a break, so I want to make sure you have plenty of time for lunch. So one more question.
Christy Haswell, Sheridan County. And it's kind of related to Kim's comment. I think we have to be careful if we're doing too much pre-NOI work, because now we don't have any teeth to keep the timeline in place. And that's an important part of why this is successful. I think that can be a slippery slope.
Great, thank you so much for the questions. And David and Tyson, thank you so much for the presentations. Lunch is served, and help yourselves to lunch. We'll just eat here and reconvene at 1:30.